Um, just before we dive into the word, and it is a well-trodden passage, I'm sure a majority of you will be familiar with, but I do ask and invite you to kind of stay tuned still. God is still able to draw new truths from even the most familiar passages of Scripture if we're willing to mine it and come to it with open mind. So I ask you to keep an open mind. But just before we do, I just want to speak about the Job Seekers prayer call, Monday mornings, 6 a.m. This was a prayer call that we initiated a few months ago. We saw that there was a need. As a steering team, we always want to be looking and thinking, what are the needs of the members and can we respond to those things? Rather than have certain things and want everyone to fall in line with those, can we come up with things that respond to needs that we see? So we decided to start a prayer call for those who are looking for work, out of work, or needing different work. And it's been such a blessing. Again, was it in the last 7 days, I think, there was a message posted, someone who had been looking for a job, who had been on the call praying. They shared there was something they were going up for, and they got the job. And so it's really, really something to celebrate. And I just want to, I'm really trying now to not be like, is it Rhonda or is it Rhoda? The little servant girl in the book of Acts, where they're praying for Paul to be released. And then when Paul is released, she's like, oh, not Paul, Peter, sorry. When Peter's released from prison, she's like, oh, how did you get here, Peter? Well, you were praying and it happened. And really trying now to, me of a few years ago would have been like, well, we prayed, but there's other factors and maybe there's coincidences. And yes, there are other factors. The people who go for jobs are qualified, are competent, are hardworking, do good interviews, do good applications. But let's not look away from the fact that we've been praying for these things and these things have happened. So I really want to commend those of us who have been on the call. It's really, really a blessing to know that you've played some tiny, tiny part in helping somebody get over the line. And so really there's a couple of invitations that I want to extend. If you are looking for work or some change in circumstances, I know it might seem like an early start or a bit of a challenging time, but jump on the call. We're seeing since we started, there are 2 people that have landed jobs as a result of this happening. We've got the receipts. But the other thing that I want to say, if you're one of the blessed people that has been blessed to get work as a result of this call, let's not pull the ladder up. So if I jump on the call and I get work, until everyone gets a job, this is going to keep happening. So if you've been blessed and you've managed to get something, then I encourage you also to stay on the call. Let's get everybody into the jobs that they're looking for. So just a little word of encouragement and a reminder. It will be in the announcements as well, but I just wanted to speak specifically to the Job Seekers call and ultimately to thank God for his kindness in seeing our needs, seeing the jobs that we go for that we think, I'm not sure if and then we still get it because he's kind and he's generous and he cares about us. So just wanted to speak to that briefly. I just invite you to bow your heads with me at this time. I'd just like to pray again. Father God in heaven, just thank you for this time. It is a sacred, almost overwhelming privilege and honour and responsibility to before we even get to the preaching, just to be able to speak your word out loud, to use our voice to speak the holy sacred word of God is something very, very special and very, very important. And then to be in a position to try and extrapolate some meaning from that is again a weighty responsibility. So I pray that you might help me to do the most justice that I can to a layer of meaning that has become clear to me in your word as a result of you speaking to me, dear Father. I don't want to sing, just want you to be heard and somebody to get something that doesn't just benefit them, but can also be of benefit to those that they are around as well. We want a cascading effect, because that's how your word works. It catches fire, and when fire gets caught, it just goes. So that's what we want to happen with your word this morning. In your name, we pray these things. Amen. Thank you, God. I don't know if any of you harbour any ambitions of creating a bit of an empire. I don't mean an empire though in the commercial sense, like Donald Trump or Alan Sugar or Elon Musk. I'm not talking about a business empire. I'm talking about like a global domination empire, like Rome or Media Persia or Babylon. If you do, then do yourself a favour and learn from history. Because history has showed us that a successful emperor understands that the biggest asset in your empire isn't money. It's not the gold or the silver or the bronze, although those things are helpful in helping you to grow and expand your reach. But the biggest asset you have is people. Because if you sit atop an empire, you have access to the smartest, the best, most brilliant people in multiple different regions throughout your territory. And if you can harness that resource, then your empire can go from strength to strength. King Nebuchadnezzar understood this principle. And so we're really lucky to have a glimpse into this empire building strategy. We don't have to hop on YouTube and watch the Diary of the CEO podcast and see Stephen Bartlett asking Nebuchadnezzar questions about his leadership principles. We don't have to do that. We can find those gems in the first verses of the book of Daniel. Thank you, Kim, for reading it. And I just want to revisit some of those verses periodically throughout the message. So from verse 3 it says, "Then the king commanded his palace master, Ashpenaz, to bring some of the Israelites of the royal family and of the nobility, young men without physical defect and handsome, versed in every branch of wisdom, endowed with knowledge and insight, and competent to serve in the king's palace. They were to be taught the language and literature of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the royal rations of food and wine. They were to be educated for 3 years, so that at the end of that time, they could be stationed in the king's court." So Nebuchadnezzar took the absolute best and brightest that he could find, and he assimilated them into the ways of Babylon, and then reaped the benefits of having the very best people that he could find to be able to work for him in administration and in leading and discharging duties within his kingdom. And he applies this philosophy in every territory that he took, including Judah. So we read in the Old Testament that he came and he besieged Jerusalem, which is the capital city of Judah, and he then instructed his chief of staff, this translated here as palace master, but in essence it's the same position, they're just synonyms. So he then instructed his chief of staff, a man by the name of Ashpenaz, to recruit members of Judah's royal family and Judah's nobility to come and work in his palace. And so once Ashpenaz has identified the smartest and the strongest and the sharpest young men, they're to be educated for how many years? 3 years in the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. This is basically enrollment in Babylon University for a degree in Babylonian studies. And so amongst this cohort were 4 young men, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And because this cohort will eventually be working centrally to advance Babylon's interests, you need them to be invested in the success of your kingdom. You don't want them working for you and hating you at the same time. Some people maybe know what that feels like, but you don't want them working for you and hating you at the same time. That's going to affect productivity. And so one of the ways that you build their fidelity to the kingdom is that you treat them well. You make them feel valued. You make them feel looked after and privileged. And then, theoretically, you earn their loyalty. And so the king, he assigns every man within this cohort a royal portion of food and wine. And when you think that a lot of university students are used to consisting on a diet of doner kebabs and Red Bull, this is a significant upgrade. But Daniel says, I can't eat this. This diet is incongruous with the diet that God has bestowed upon his people. And this is the point in the story where Adventist ears prick up like little meerkats, right? Because as a people who generally embrace a diet that is consistent with the Old Testament, virtually every single one of us in here knows what it is to be in a situation, a dynamic when you're presented with food and with dishes that present a challenge for us. And so I think we've always felt that we have a vested interest in what happens next. And so Daniel says to Ashpenaz, I can't eat this stuff. And Ashpenaz responds, I'm afraid of the king. I'm afraid of my king. And if I don't give you this, and you guys end up physically inferior in any way, is my head. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean he will literally have me decapitated. And so Daniel, he regroups and he goes to a subordinate of Ashpenaz. Daniel approaches the guard who is guarding him, who also happens to be in charge of distributing what would be his ration of food. And so Daniel approaches this guard and he says to him, look, for 10 days, give us vegetables and water and then see how we look. What's the worst that can happen in 10 days? And so the guard agrees to take a chance on his proposal and he gives Daniel just as he's requested for 10 days. And at the end of that 10-day period, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are in better shape, both physically and mentally, than every other person in their cohort. Now, I think we've always tended to view this particular biblical episode as being about standing up for God and about the virtues of a healthy diet. Which it kind of is, but that isn't all that it's about. This episode shows us something about how we should engage with people around us. The people in our workplaces, the people in our educational institutions, the people in our living spaces, because for Daniel, all of those things happen to be intersected. But it shows us how we should deal with the people that are around us, particularly those who are not like us. Because unless you've grown up in Loma Linda, or maybe Battle Creek, Michigan, or some other enclave where virtually everybody is Adventist, most of us are used to being in the significant minority as an Adventist wherever you go. And so I think Daniel's circumstances kind of resonate with us. Not obviously, fortunately for us, not the bit about being taken from your home, but the bit about being someone who's in a minority around other people. And so we can identify with that. And so I think the lesson that we've generally taken from watching this episode unfold is live out your faith and never back down. But when you really look at the nuance of the story, I think that the lesson is actually live out your faith, but at the same time, be sensitive to how living out your faith affects other people. And I see a couple of amused faces. You probably never heard someone preach about that message, have you? That might even sound contradictory to sermons that you've previously heard. But I want to encourage us to take another look. So let's take a second and actually take a look at the conversation that Daniel has with Ashpenaz. And that's in verse 10. And if you look at what happens here, Ashpenaz is the king's chief of staff. This is like a really senior leader within the administration, within the setup of Babylon. And so Daniel is having a conversation with him, and Daniel makes it clear that to eat this stuff would defile him. And look at what Ashpenaz says. It says, the palace master said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord, the king. He has appointed your food and your drink. If he should see you in poorer condition than the other young men of your own age, you would endanger my head with the king. So Ashpenaz is saying, what you're asking me to do doesn't simply have high stakes for you and your relationship with your God. It has high stakes for me and my relationship with my head, which is kind of important. And generally, I think when we encounter situations in our lives, be they professional, be they educational, wherever they are, When we encounter situations that challenge how we want to live out our faith and honour God, we tend to approach those situations solely thinking about ourselves. Like, what are the implications going to be for me if I can't get this sorted out on my terms? Without really thinking about it, that's the lens in which we approach these kinds of situations. And sometimes I think in thinking that way, we totally miss the fact that there can also be implications for other people who are in proximity to us if we are enabled to serve God exactly the way that we want to serve Him. But Daniel doesn't miss this. And that's what I think makes him a special guy. Ashpenaz said to him, look, I hear what you're saying, Daniel, but if this goes sideways, it's literally going to be my head. I am afraid of the king. Those are literally the words he says. I am afraid of my lord the king. Ashpenaz could not be more transparent, more upfront, more honest about this situation. And these are exactly the kind of qualities that we actually look for in management and our superiors. How many of us have been in situations at work and we're like, I wish they would just be more transparent. I wish they'd just be honest with me and tell me what's really happening. I wish they would just show us what's really taking place. But they're always keeping us in the dark. That's exactly what Ashpenaz is doing. He couldn't be more upfront about his feelings and about the situation. I am afraid of the king. He's actually making himself kind of vulnerable as a leader to be really talking about the realness of his situation. Daniel doesn't then say, my solution is the only acceptable solution. I refuse to back down here. Daniel doesn't do that. Daniel is aware of the stakes that somebody else is now facing as a result of his faith. And so what Daniel now does is he chooses to leave it be with Ashpenaz. And instead he regroups and he now goes to his guard, the person who's guarding him, who's in charge of the rations, someone much lower down the food chain, someone much lower down the pecking order. And Daniel says to this man, he says, look, my man, let's just try this for 10 days. We don't need to trouble Ashpenaz with this. I'm aware now of the kind of pressures that he's under. I'm aware of the difficult circumstances, the paperwork, the bureaucracy, all of the stress that's going to cause it. We don't need to trouble Ashpenaz with this. Maybe just between yourself and me and my 3 friends here, maybe we can just run this little experiment. It's not going to cause any drama for anyone if we just try this for 10 days. Chances are nobody will even notice. And so this is a request that is palatable, crucially, critically, to his God. Daniel hasn't gone and escalated this to the chief of staff again. And so they run the experiment, and the results are better than anybody could have expected. Daniel and his friends, living God's way, are found to be better in every way than everybody else. They have the receipts. They literally have the empirical data that everybody can see. And so now, on this basis, the God allows them to stay in this lane consistent with the diet that they believe is the way that they best live out their faith. But this situation has been managed in a way that has not brought any material harm to those around Daniel. And that point is important. It should be important to us. Wherever you go, unless you deal directly with the king, or the prime minister, or the CEO, everybody that you encounter is beholden to somebody else. Everybody has somebody that they answer to. As Christians, specifically as Seventh-day Adventists, it's not uncommon for us to have certain faith-based needs, be they to do with observing the Sabbath, be they to do with what we do or don't eat, be they to do with what we will or won't go, be they to do with what we will or won't do. And these needs impact our ability to honour God. And so understandably, we tend to ask ourselves, what are the implications for me if I don't get what I need? I think that Daniel's sensitivity and his awareness and his diplomacy show us that there is also room for asking, what are the implications for everyone else if I do get what I need here? Can I help Ashpenaz avoid getting his head cut off? Daniel is thinking about the stakes for everyone. He's saying, I understand your situation. I understand the position that my request is potentially going to put you in. So how about we pilot this within certain parameters? Give me an opportunity to show you that living this way won't cause me any harm, which in turn won't cause you any harm. You see, the interesting thing is that being aware of other people's needs in his pursuit of faithfulness is actually the thing that helped Daniel get this thing over the line. I'm going to say that again because I think that's really important. Being aware of other people's needs in his pursuit of faithfulness actually helped Daniel to get this thing over the line. God is always calling us to be faithful. But I don't think he's calling us to not consider how our needs affect others. To stand up for God, but where possible, where not compromising yourself, stand up in a way that is sensitive to the demands that will subsequently be put on other people. Now, I don't want to focus solely on the food element of this story. I feel like we get caught up a lot on the food part of this story, and that's fine. I don't want to focus exclusively on the food element of this story, but I do genuinely like what we can extrapolate from Daniel's request, and I think this is a really kind of important part of the story. So Daniel says, just give me vegetables and water. And generally, we've kind of reflected on this, and we've interpreted this as kind of being about the health message. We've used this to reinforce our view of the health message. This is the healthiest way to live, which it is, obviously, that goes without saying. But I genuinely don't think that's Daniel's only motivation here. I maybe don't even know if that's Daniel's major motivation here. I think Daniel is also conscious of causing as little inconvenience as possible to his colleagues. That's why what he's doing is really asking for the simplest, most basic version of his requirements. Just give me water and vegetables. You don't even have to cook the veggies, so you give them to me raw. It doesn't matter. Whatever makes it easier for you to facilitate my request. I've been in positions in the past where I've been planning church events and stuff, like previous districts and stuff, like you're planning church events, planning retreats, events of this kind of nature. And when it comes down to the food, and you're dealing with external parties and planners to try and get things sorted, it gets really techy. Because when you go shopping yourself, you already know what you don't have to negotiate with anyone. You just know, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. When you're dealing with external planners and you have to make it clear, it gets really techy. Because you'll be trying to explain things to the planners like, yeah, okay, so we can have meat, but not all meat. Like, we definitely can't have pork, and that's mainly it. But there's a couple of other low-key stuff like rabbit, just in case that's on your menu, that's all. And maybe there's some other ones that I haven't even thought of that you need to think of that we don't need. So that's the meat. And yeah, we can have fish. Let's make it easy for you. We can have fish. Oh no, but we can't have shellfish or any crustaceans or any bottom feeder. Oh, and the fish have to have scales. What do you mean you don't know what scales are? The fish have to have scales. And I mean, you can't use any sauces or seasonings that have crustaceans. No fish sauce, no oyster sauce. You can't use any of that stuff. And some of us are okay with dairy, but not all of us are okay with dairy. I hope that makes sense. Is that okay? So we'll basically have your normal menu, but we need it slightly amended with this laundry list of requirements that I've given you, and then you can give me that version. And like, you can literally see people's eyes start waddling when they're trying to get to grips with all these requirements. Daniel is standing on business and is standing up for his beliefs, But he's being like super low maintenance. So give me the simplest thing that you can. I honestly don't just think that's because it's good for him. I think he also doesn't want to take liberties with the people that he's asking to do him a favour. Guys, you don't honour God by giving people a headache. You honour God by saying, I can't eat this, but I don't want to cause you no stress. Keep it simple. And yes, I now know I might get food envy when I see you bringing everybody else's stuff and that looks good and I can't have that thing. But one of the ways that I honour God is by showing that I also honour you. I honour your time. I honour your energy. I honour your stress levels. So yeah, my version might not be as nice as everyone. That's my burden to carry. This point isn't specific to food, but food works as an example, because we've all been there. Stand up for your beliefs, but know when to keep it simple. That's the Daniel way. After Daniel kept it simple, he had provable, demonstrable evidence that he was now able to perform better than everybody else. Verse 19. It says, verse 19, and the king spoke with them, and among them all, no one was found to be better. No one was found to compare with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they were stationed in the king's court, in every matter of wisdom and understanding concerning which the king inquired of them. He found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. When you stand up to honour God, and you seek a concession in order to help you do that, you need to make sure that you perform better as a result of the concession that you've been given. If you're in your workplace and you need to ask for Sabbaths off, or you need to ask to leave early on Fridays, it will be incumbent upon you to be better the way that Daniel was better when given his concession to allow him to honour God. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Get your work done. Don't let somebody else have to be picking up your slack so that you get to go and honour your God. Pick up their slack. Start early the days that you're in. Check that your requirements do not create burdens and stress for those around you. Let your work rate be unimpeachable. Leave them with no choice but to say, no one compares to him. But look how hard he goes. She's 10 times better than everybody else in her application, in her dedication, in her commitment, in her diligence. Stand up for your beliefs, but as much as it depends on you, be better. That's the Daniel way. Daniel also models another important virtue that I think is overlooked, and the reason I think it's overlooked is because we've always come to view Daniel as someone who stands up and never backs down. But he models another really important virtue. Daniel knows when to let something go. See, there's a really important juxtaposition in this text, and it's something that I've always had a feeling is deliberate by the author. This is a reading from verse 6. It says, among them were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah from the tribe of Judah. The palace master gave them other names. Daniel he called Belshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved, that he would not defile himself with the royal rations of food and wine. So he asked the palace master to allow him not to defile himself. So the text is saying, to paraphrase, is saying the palace master gave them Babylonian names and he gave them Babylonian food. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the Babylonian food. Daniel could have said, I will not defile myself with this Babylonian name that honors your Babylonian gods, and I will not defile myself with this Babylonian food. But he doesn't say that. It's like he's saying, subtly, low-key, Belshazzar ain't my name, so I can let that one go. What you put in me matters, because what you put in me becomes who and what I become. Like literally, on a physiological, biological level, what you put in me will affect who I become. But I'm not bothered what you put on me. I can just let that one wash over me, because it doesn't really change who I am. At my old workplace, I managed to negotiate quite early when I started with management to leave early on Fridays because of the Sabbath. I went to my manager, I went to his manager, I went to his manager. I was very blessed in that I was able to negotiate. I explained to my manager the principle of the Sabbath being holy time, and so trying to be in the best possible position to be ready to observe that holy time. So hours on a Friday generally were 9 to 5. I used to do 8 to 4. So the same amount of hours, but still a concession that they were making, that they didn't have to make, but a concession that they were making in order to allow me to stand in my faith. And so I was blessed. They kind of allowed this to happen. Nobody else had anything like this. And then after a while, a new guy joined my team at this particular place. A guy called Dave. We used to call him Big Dave. Big. Very crazy, big thing. But he wasn't just anyone. He joined as like a senior partner within, not just the department, but specifically in my team. He came in as a senior partner. And so every Friday, when it got to 4 p.m, I would log off, and Big Dave, big by nature, he'd make a point of being really loud and declaring in like a really obnoxious way. He's one of those obnoxious people, big booming voice, and he'd make a point without fail, Matthew has to get home before it gets dark. Ha ha ha. He can't be out when it's dark. He has to be home. Ha 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 ha. This was also the time when I still ate meat. And for context, and I really don't want us to tumble down this rabbit hole, but just for context, what I'm about to explain, there is a mistaken tradition. I don't know where it came from, but there is a mistaken tradition. I don't want to blow anybody's minds. Please don't get too far if this is the first time you're hearing this. There is a mistaken tradition in some Adventist circles that we are not allowed to eat duck. Okay? Don't have to get hung up on that. We can serve duck later. Okay? But I was still functioning within this paradigm that we weren't allowed to eat duck. I ate meat, but I still understood that we weren't allowed to eat duck. And so there'd be times we'd go out for a work lunch or work dinner. We go to a Chinese place. There'd be duck getting circulated, it'd be brought round, and then, who'd you hear? Oh, big booming Dave with his big voice. Oh, Matthew can't eat a holy duck. Oh, the duck is a holy animal. Matthew bows down to it. He can't eat duck. Ha, 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 ha. You're building up a kind of picture of a kind of character we're talking about. Now, bear in mind, this is one of the most senior guys in my team and in my department. Was it annoying? Yes. Was it belittling? Yes. Was it even being a bit disrespectful of my religious beliefs? Yes. But did it change who I was? No. Did it inhibit my religious freedoms? No. Because I was still able to leave early on a Friday and enjoy a concession that had been freely given to me to enable me to honour my God. So say what you want about me, Big Dave. Call me Belshazzar. I don't care, because that's not my name and it doesn't change who I am. Stand up for your beliefs, yes. But know which things and when to let those things go. That's the Daniel way. There's a song that we used to sing in church when I was a kid. I haven't sung it for more, but this is done in Paul. Some of you remember it still. Dare to be a Daniel. Anyone remember that song? Dare to be a Daniel. Dare to be a Daniel. Dare to be a Daniel. You remember it better than I do. I didn't know it was on. But there's that song, Dare to be a Daniel. I think that we think daring to be a Daniel is all about standing up to the man, which is, but it's also about standing up for the man. Thinking about how my faith stance affects those around me and trying to live it out in ways that helps their experience rather than hinders their experience. Verse 18 of this text. Just to give context, I'm going to read from verse 17. It says, 17 isn't up there, but it says, to these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and skill in every aspect of literature and wisdom. Daniel also had insight into all visions and dreams. At the end of the time that the king had set for them to be brought in, the palace master brought them into the presence of Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among them all, no one was found to compare with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they were stationed in the king's court. Daniel's method of standing up for God and living out his faith meant that Ashpenaz got to look good in front of the king rather than getting the chop. We haven't always been concerned about what happens to Ashpenaz. As long as I get the things that let me honor my God, then I'm cool. Ashpenaz who? But Daniel cared. I'm pretty sure that God cared. It isn't going against God to think about how your service to God affects those around you who don't know God. There are certain practices that God calls us into as an expression of our faith. Things like observing the Sabbath. Me keeping the Sabbath holy shouldn't just make my life better. It should make everyone's life around me better. Especially those who made concessions in order that I can keep the Sabbath. Ashpenaz should benefit too. That's how I show him who God is. Me eating a clean diet shouldn't just make me healthier. It should genuinely help to make everybody feel better. It should not cause elevated stress levels and high blood pressure for those who are kindly trying to accommodate me. Ashpenaz should benefit too. That's how I show him who God is. The wisdom of God, through his word, through the Spirit, through our spiritual ancestors like Daniel, shouldn't just make my life better. It should make everyone's life better. For listening to the things that I say, for observing the things that I do, for observing the choices that I make, from the work rate that I exhibit, Ashpenaz should benefit too, because that's how I show him who God is. God gave knowledge and wisdom to Daniel and his friends. And we've always thought that that knowledge and wisdom manifested itself and kind of was exclusively used in the reading of signs and deciphering of symbols and the interpretation of dreams, which it was. But maybe it was also knowledge and wisdom to understand how to relate to people and how to be a benefit and not a burden. When you honor your God and you simultaneously make their lives better, there is no greater testimony of who God is. That's the Daniel way. Just one last point before I sit down. So I don't have the text, but I'll paraphrase. Okay. In verse 8 of the text, we see it says here, Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself. He made a resolution to stand for God. And this is actually one passage, one text where I really like the kind of quaint language that the King James Version uses in its translation of this verse. It uses like a really cool expression that is hard to define, but everyone kind of knows what it means. He purposed in his heart. We see in verse 9, it's at this point that God intervenes in an invisible, immeasurable way. God allowed Daniel to receive favor and compassion from the palace master. What that means, and this is maybe the most important one, is that before utilizing the soft skills that enable Daniel to know how to talk to people, before devising a plan that he could roll out that shows everyone, this works for me, but it will also work for you too. Before any of the things that Daniel did to turn this situation in his favor, God had already made the crooked path straight. God had already made a way in the wilderness. Everything that Daniel did was because of what God had already done. But it all started from the moment that Daniel purposed in his heart that he was going to be faithful to God. It was a decision. It was a choice, even before it was an action. And once he made that decision that he was going to be faithful to God, well, now God allows Daniel, without Daniel even realizing, to receive favor and compassion and concessions and help and benefits and bonuses that will enable Daniel to honor God the way that he wants to. Daniel made the choice. God did the hard work. And so I want to encourage you in closing, in your own walk, wherever your walk takes you, to stand up for what you believe, to know when to keep it simple, just like Daniel. Where possible, where it depends on you, be better than the rest, just like Daniel. Know which things to let go, wash over you, that you're not going to take on, just like Daniel. But the ability to do and discern those things comes from God. So before trying to take any action, purpose in your heart that you will be faithful. Trust that God wants to help you. But remember that he also wants to help those around you. So spare a thought for Ashmanites, just like that.